Do you remember the U.S. invasion of Libya? The U.S. and NATO invasion of Libya? And how during this entire time there were talks of humanitarian crisis that were going on as a result of the rebels fighting, but was not correctly linked to the people that were actually backing the invasion of Libya, the U.S. and NATO forces, and how human rights organizations went out and they screamed about how terrible the things were going on. There's a humanitarian crisis, there's not food, people are dying, there's violence in the street, and there's everything else. You remember that? Did you also notice how those things just kind of all of a sudden disappeared? And nobody's talking about the humanitarian crisis that's actually going on right now, that's actually worse than it was during the NATO-backed invasion? Yes. According to many sources, there is a tremendous humanitarian crisis going on in Libya right now that's being completely ignored. Now, under U.S. rule, the Western media just seems to have completely forgotten that this situation is even going on. And in fact, the current humanitarian crisis is being completely ignored by the Western media. According to many reports, the number of people killed since the NATO invasion has actually gone up by 10 or 20 times. There's actually more violence in Libya now than there was on the actual attack against Gaddafi. But all of that is just being completely ignored by the Western media. Now, author Neil Clark, speaking in an interview with RT, said that there are massacres going on frequently in Libya, and these are being completely ignored by the Western media, who, by the way, is actually responsible for these things happening. The West is responsible. France, NATO, the United States, the UK, Canada, all of these people were responsible for the invasion of Libya that actually took place, and now under the rule of these countries, there are almost daily massacres now occurring against people. But all of that's being completely ignored by these same Western powers that set up this entire situation. Now, in an interview, Neil Clark actually talks about Amnesty International and other human rights organizations that are, and their behavior now that the U.S. and NATO now have control over Libya. It tells it all. Amnesty International has been very good on Libya. They've been talking about the number of detentions that have taken place there under the new regime, but of course the Western powers aren't interested. They got what they wanted. They got rid of Gaddafi. They got a pro-Western government in power now in Tripoli. They're taking control of the oil industry. There's privatization for Western corporations, and they don't really give a toss about what's going on, about human rights abuses, the fact that demonstrations are banned throughout the country. It's time to move onto Syria, of course. And that is very telling. During the actual invasion of Libya by NATO forces, Amnesty International could not shut up about things that were going on. They would say all kinds of things about Gaddafi, a lot of them which turned out not to actually be true, and then on the same side completely ignored the tens of thousands of people that have died from NATO bombings and the more people that have been killed as a result of the NATO invasion. They just completely overlooked that. And then when they went ahead and tried to have their I reported this once before, where they had the contest who was the human rights hero of the year, and it was actually Muammar Gaddafi who had actually won because of the kinds of programs that he had put through in Libya, the things that made people's lives easier, the things that made people's lives better. Also, one of the reasons why they had the highest living standard of any country in Africa. And then when it was obvious that Muammar Gaddafi was going to win, they just completely shut down the entire vote and pretended it never happened. And just, not even like it got hacked. They just pretended it never happened. That's very typical, that things like Amnesia International and the Western media working in collusion to attack governments that U.S. imperialism or NATO imperialism doesn't like, but then just sort of offhandedly not even really talk about what it is that the NATO forces are actually causing and the devastation that's going on in the countries that they are in control of. It's very, very telling. Because what's happening right now is the people of Libya are being ground to the dirt. U.S. profits and the profits of smaller imperialist countries like the UK and others are coming out of Libya on the backs, the blood of Libyan people. Resources are being grabbed and stolen, and people are being killed to maintain those, or to even to get those. And that's what this war was really all about. And it is so appropriate that the Western media is now absolutely ignoring all of these abuses that are going on, these massacres that are happening, and all these human rights abuses that are actually occurring at this moment under their control. And it shows what this is really all about.